we're going to start anyway. I'm Dufresne Stoller. I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Democratic Citizenship. I'm very excited that you could all make it here to our panel discussion about this year's election. And I'm very, very proud that we have such a wonderful group of scholars here to present. Most of them are connected to the center in one way or another. On the election, on presenting their research that is ongoing in this long, nail-biting election campaign. So it is actually our mission to get in touch with you beyond our immediate community, to reach out a little bit and to provide you with insights about our research on elections, on participation, civic engagement, and representation, and so on. If you are interested in following our event also in the future, you're welcome to sign up, and the sign-up sheet is going around. You can put down your name and email address and institutional affiliation. So there are many presenters here today. We are still expecting one more.
She's coming.
She's coming. Good. Excellent. So these are the presenters here are members, or I would say in some cases friends, and in some cases even new friends of the center, and they have all collected their type of data and have conducted their kind of research with external funds in this election campaign, and can give you a little bit of a glimpse of their insights so far. There is the Canadian Election Study Project, the Vote Compass. There's a project on polls, on ethnic diversity of the candidates, on the local parliament, and on studying the media, and so on. But before our guests are introduced, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Professor Richard Schultz, who is the James McGill Professor in Political Science at McGill University, and he has published several books on regulation and policy making in Canada, and has commented on Canadian politics before, so I'm particularly happy also to welcome him, and I hand this over to you. Enjoy.
Is this on? Can you hear me? I suspect and I won't talk about the purpose now that Stephen has described it. Our other presenter will be here. I suspect the primary reason why I was asked to moderate this discussion is that I'm probably the only member of the Department of Political Science who does not have an informed opinion on anything scientific or methodological. The other reason I think I suspect is that Deepa knows from the 6 years that when I was chair, I have quite a good record of herding cats. And we have a limited amount of time today, and we have a very distinguished group of cats. So they will be, I hope, herded quite well, by which I mean, I want to tell them my name is Schultz and I'm in control, and you each have 10 minutes. After that, your microphones go dead. This turns into a taser, and we will get on with the next presenter. Anyway, let's start with Patrick Fournier of the University of Montreal, who is principal investigator with the Canadian Election Study, both for 2011 and particularly for 2015.
So the very first thing I want to say is I do not have explanations about what has been going on in 2015 election. Honestly, it takes months of data analysis to figure out why an election will actually unfold the way it did. And actually, in our case, we only have part of our data that's actually being collected. And so 3 surveys are remaining, so I do not have the answers. You probably have tons of questions. I simply do not have the answers. But what I can talk about is data that you will be able to use in a few months to get all the answers to the questions that you have. And so I'll be speaking about the Canadian Election Study. This is a long-standing project. It's actually celebrating its 50th anniversary. Every election has been investigated except one. Past directors of the team are present in the room, for instance, André. The current team is headed by this group of individuals, including Declan and myself. We have the final say, so we get all the flack and all the blame. But we also have a group of young, dynamic collaborators who actually weigh in throughout the process. And some of them are here today, Daniel and also Yannick as well. And this is the design for the current study. Essentially, we have two components, two independent samples. One is typical CS. This follows the pattern all the way back to 1988, basically. 3 surveys, 2 on the phone, 1 by mail, 1 during the campaign, 2 after the election. Because of the number of respondents we had this time around, which is typical numbers for CS, we could not cover the extended, extraordinary, lengthy campaign that we had this time. So field work actually started the day following Labor Day. This was a calculated risk, but it turns out that it seems that most of the movement occurred later on anyway, so we were lucky. But we also had a safety net because our second component was done entirely online. We took about, I would say, 12% of our budget and said, okay, we're going online with this money, and we will try using the participants of typical online panels, this time provided by Survey Sampling International. And we could actually cover most of the campaign because we started in week 2 of August. So if something would have happened, we would have captured it with our online rolling cross section. Intensity of the study increased also after Labor Day, and so we have the same type of intensity we have in the telephone rolling cross section. The main objective of this component is to figure out, can we do reliable election studies online? And so we designed it that most of the questions, the great majority of questions, are actually asked on both modes at the same time with exactly the same wording. And so some cool analysis will be able to be conducted afterwards to figure out, beyond our tenure, so the following CS, is it worthy to follow with the telephone, or should we move online? Of course, there's still room for innovation. There's still some questions that are asked in one mode and not the other. And I will talk a bit about that today. Anytime you design a survey, you have to strike a good balance between cool, new, flashy stuff and old, historical, boring stuff. Questions. I can talk about one innovation today. This was actually suggested by Daniel in a forum we had. Because we always try to capture the views of respondents using the little boxes that we design. And we think that their views fall well into these little boxes. And so for once, we tried to give them the opportunity to decide what they wanted to talk about in the survey. And so online, because you can't do this on the phone, we have a text box when they actually can talk about each of the parties. And again, we thank Daniel for the suggestion. And you can come up with, for example, analyses like this that Stuart conducted, where he identified the words that were particular, that were specific to each party. So when we talk about discourse about each of these parties, are some words used for some parties more than others? So the blue words are words about the Conservatives, red are for Liberals, and so on. As you can see, that some elements are simply more predominant for each party. So for the Conservatives, you see the economy, you see the Senate, you see dishonest, corrupt, arrogant, and so on. And you can, and for Liberals, you see experience or inexperience, both being mentioned. And each of these terms can always be used in a positive turn or a negative turn. So for further analysis you can do is actually look at what voters and non-voters of a party are actually using in terms of language. And so in this case, you all have words about the Conservatives. The blue ones are voiced by people who actually vote for the Conservatives, and the black ones are voiced by those who don't vote for the Conservatives. And all of this raw data will be accessible, so if you can search for any type of word you want. For example, talking about the Conservatives, 50 people used a variation of the word dictator or dictatorship. 5 actually used the word Hitler when talking about the Conservatives. So you can actually dig into the data, find issues you want to dig into, and so on. So we have one for the Liberals, we have one for the NDP, and so on. But I would argue that the most useful analyses to uncover or explain opinion change, explain why people change their mind, either compared to last time or during the campaign, is actually to use questions that are that have been asked regularly in the past, and where you can actually ascertain whether views have changed. So if the vote choice. And here are a few hints or a few examples of attitudes that, if you look if you put them in context compared to other years, you'll find some interesting patterns. Again, it's not an explanation of what's going on, but it is, you might have a few hints, a few indications. For example, this is the tracking over 4 elections from 2006 to this year of mean party evaluations. This is a typical thermometer score on 0 to 100. These are the main scores for each of the 3 main parties. And of course, this is not decisive in the sense that, for example, Layton was the most popular leader in 3 elections, but he was not prime minister. And so it does weigh significantly on vote choice, but it's not a single most determining factor. But it is interesting to note that Harper is much less positively evaluated than his main opponents. He's actually the only person across this 10-year period that had a lower score than Harper was Michael Ignatieff in 2011. And so you see that the Liberals and the NDP leaders actually tied in terms of rating. So why did Harper decline? On what dimension of his personality or performance did he decline? Well, we have some indications about this. If you look at the main traits that are typically associated with leadership, so whether the leader cares about people, is competent, is honest, or is considered a strong leader. And the signature for Harper was always competence and strength. But he's actually taken a tumble across the board, even on competence and strength in 2015. And if you add his opponents in here, you find that he's actually rated lower on each dimension than his 2 opponents. Even on competence and strength, Trudeau is rated higher than Stephen Harper. I don't have much time. I will jump to not only leadership, but content issue. In this case, economy. Again, this is often an issue that's overinflated in terms of strength because it is not the single most determining factor in the election. For example, you can ask the Liberals, who in 2006, people had very positive views about how the economy had evolved. And here we're talking about the national economy over the past year. So most people had a positive outlook about how the economy had evolved, but still, the Liberals lost power in 2006. In 2008, views were mostly negative about the economy, but still, the Conservatives were re-elected. So it does weigh, it does have an impact, but it should not be overestimated. What's interesting is in 2015, we have the most negative economic evaluations that we've seen over the past decade. Not only that, the voters actually blame the government partly for the evolution of the economy, right? In 2008, most people recognized that this was the result of an international economic crisis, and so domestic action was not necessarily driving the state of the economy. But this time around, about twice as many people actually say that the federal policies contributed to the fact that the economy is actually running worse this time around. So again, this doesn't do the Conservatives in any way, but it does put in a particular light the fact that they chose to actually run strictly on this issue, right? They put it as one of their 3 main things they want to stress. But when opinion on the economy is so negative, when people actually blame you for how the economy is doing, perhaps it is not the smartest strategy to put this constantly at the forefront. Again, I have a few more slides, but I'm running out of time, so hints, clues, but nothing definite, no answer for sure.
Thank you very much, both for the content and the timing. Our second presenter is Daniel Rubenson, who's an associate professor in the Department of Politics at Ryerson in Toronto. He's speak about the local parliament project that he's closely involved in.
Great, thanks. So thanks very much to Dietland and her team for organizing this. And do you know which one it is? Oh, 2 different. So it's the bottom one. Okay, so I am one of the investigators on this thing that we have called the Local Parliament Project. I'll tell you in a second. Hopefully, it'll become clear why we've given it this name. This is a joint effort with Peter Lowen at the University of Toronto and Royce Coop, who is at the University of Manitoba. And so I, like Patrick, have no answers for you. I probably have some questions for you, but no answers. I certainly have some questions for Patrick for later. So I'm going to tell you about the design of our project, and then somewhat similar sort of thing to Patrick, give you a couple of graphs with some colored lines on them, and to talk about some trends that we've seen in the data. So really, this project consists of three studies that are related. The one that's relevant for today is an election study of sorts, though it isn't a replacement or really a competitor even with the Canadian election study that Patrick is in charge of. But the purpose is to try to explain the election and try to explain more specifically to think about how local conditions condition national outcomes. Right? So how do local events, local issues, local candidates, and so on, how do those have an impact? What part of the explanation for electoral outcomes can we attribute to local issues? Since, as everyone in this room knows, it's not one election; it's 338 local elections. Right? So that's the first study. The second is a series of field experiments where what we're interested in is legislator behavior, actually. So how do legislators attend to or not preferences at the local level? Right? Do they take these things into account at all when they're voting or more likely speaking about issues in Parliament and outside of Parliament? And then finally, kind of in the grand tradition of these sorts of things, a downstream study. So we take that legislative behavior, and then that becomes a predictor in a model of vote choice in a subsequent election. Okay, so does what legislators do actually affect what voters do? But what I'm going to talk about today is this study one, right? So to what extent do local considerations affect outcomes in the election? And so because we're political scientists, we have to have a 2x2 matrix, right? Which if there was an economist here, he would snicker and leave the room. So we think that, there are more dimensions than this, but we think that we can kind of think about elections in a country like Canada as breaking down along national and local dimensions. Some candidates are much more nationally oriented than others. Some issues are very local and important in a federal election, but really only important in one or a handful of districts. And so we want to sort of explore with this project and with the particular design we have these kinds of interactions. Right? So what's the design? What sort of data do we have? So we have a large campaign survey where we are getting data from somewhere between 600 to 1,000, probably right now, today, 1,000 people per day. We have a total sample we will have by Sunday around 35,000, maybe a little bit more than that. The survey is relatively long, like the CES online survey. It's about 20, it varies, between 15 and 25 minutes, depending on what types of things we have, obviously, in the survey. But it's actually a very simple study. We're not measuring that many things. It's just that we're measuring them in a sort of a longer way, I guess. So, standard election study type of measures. And then we have a very large battery of issue questions where we're capturing people's positions on a large range of issues, and at the same time also measuring the salience that every individual in the survey puts on these issues. How important is this particular issue to you? Which is neat in a campaign this long because we can really see trends up and down. So when horrible photos of children washing up on Turkish beaches happens, there's both the salience and sort of opinion on increasing refugees goes way up. Sadly, those of us who study public opinion know that sentiment evaporates very quickly. Right? So we can study those sorts of things. We also have a post-election study where we're going to re-interview about 15,000 people. At the same time, because we're very interested in local things, we also have, and this is what Royce is really leading, an ethnographic study of candidates during the campaign, a selection of candidates, We are conducting a post-election survey with all candidates. We have a whole bunch of social media data, and we have a prediction study, which I hope you've all done. And if you haven't, go to localparliament.ca/predict and get your predictions in. It's both fun and for science. Okay, so we have great Election 42 data for you. This is Twitter data. So we're collecting every tweet with the election-related hashtags. So we will have roughly 3.5 million tweets that are sent about this election since September. So this is the daily count. So each of these spikes is an event in the election. On this day, these days, they happen to be debates where people love to get on social media. I'm not sure the debates really matter that much, but Twitter goes crazy during social media. So on the September whatever it was, 16th or whatever, 18th debate, there were 150,000 tweets with these hashtags, right? So we have all of those, and we can geocode them so we know where people are when they're doing this, and we can draw some analysis from what's happening on social media. And is that driving anything in the election? Okay, so Dietland wants some actual data, so that's why I have this slide. Just some very basic sort of trends similar to what Patrick presented. So these were the, and so each day here, remember, we have on average about 800 respondents. So this was vote choice or vote intention for the first 5 or 6 days of the first week of the campaign, maybe. This is what it looks like for the whole campaign. So you can see these nice trends. I don't know if your data shows similar things. Probably it does. Hopefully it does. So this is vote choice. As many of us know, certainly people who have ever talked to Andre know, we want to also measure how people think about the chances of various parties winning. Right. So these are the chances that a party will, the self-reported chances of everybody saying this party is going to win the most seats. So you can see how those numbers move around. I don't think the Conservatives have ever been in the lead on this. You can also ask about the chances in the local riding, right? Anybody who wants to study strategic voting, for example, needs to think about these things. And again, all of these trends seem to be kind of pointing in the same direction. We have, of course, Dietland yesterday sent around a number of questions that was equal to the number of minutes plus maybe 5. One of them was, niqab, refugees, and so on. And we have all of those data, and I'd be more than happy to talk about that in the Q&A. I think we have some interesting, sort of very preliminary thoughts about those things and how they've shaped up in the campaign. But I'm sure that I am against my limit now. I've got 2 minutes. Okay. Well, yeah. No,
I auction them off.
Give me an opportunity to speak, and I will fill that vacuum. So on the niqab, we in our data find very similar things to what everybody else is finding. The overwhelming majority of Canadians agree with the Conservative position on this. If you break it down by party, the overwhelming majority of Green Party supporters, Liberals, Conservatives, Bloc supporters, NDP supporters, all share this view. Foreign-born Canadians share this view. 1 minute, okay. I think related to this is some, again, very preliminary work we've done on looking at the vote choice among immigrant Canadians. Right? And so in the past, that has not necessarily favored the Conservatives. Our data suggests that in this election, it most certainly is, and that they have a fairly sizable advantage among foreign-born Canadians who are even more likely to share that same view on that particular issue. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure that's been there. Thank you very much.
Just to be fair, so that you all know, if one of the speakers wishes to give up minutes, advise the other speakers, I'm prepared to accept bids for the political science department at McGill for those minutes. Our third speaker is now that she has her breath, is Claire Durand. She's a professor of sociology at the University of Montreal. She has extensive experience in polling, and I think her topic is, can we rely on the polls? Claire.
So apologies for being late. I had forgotten that my tablet goes over the okay, so just two points. That's in fact our polls biased and do polls differ according to notes. And so the first question is, are polls biased? So this is what happened in 2011. The Conservatives were underestimated by 3.7%. Those are time series analysis. And the web and IBR contributed to bias. IBR underestimated the Conservative by 2 points compared to citizen votes. And Nanas overestimated the Liberals and underestimated the NDP. Now, if you look at Ontario, it's 4.1%. With Nanas, different from the others. Nanas is rather special. It has a very, very different question that is not an voting intention question. It is what is your two preferences or something like that, and they publish it in the first one. So I decided to go backward again in 2008. On the right-hand side, those are the election results, and you see that you still have this underestimation of the Conservative Party and with overestimation of the NDP in this case. And this is for Ontario. Conservative estimated at about 36 and they have 39. Back again, 2006. Now it's not underestimated. So the question is, 2015, will it be like 2006 or like 2008 and 2011? At that time, we didn't have these IVR polls and we didn't have any web polls. So when I look at 2015, I use local regression. The advantage is that it shows the different polls and the discrepancy between the estimates. For Canada, it's not that bad. There's not that much differences between polls. But what you have right now, this is for this morning, 36% about for the Liberal Party, 31% for the Conservative, and 22, 23 for the NDP. And this is about the same as other people. But if the Conservative Party is underestimated by 3 points, what happens? So revisited, it gives you that. Okay, so I withdraw 3 points to the Conservative and I gave 1.25 points to, I gave 3 points to the Conservative, withdraw 1.25 points to the Liberals and the NDP, and 0.5 points to the Greens that are likely overestimated. So it gives you the two parties exactly as far. Now, Ontario. Ontario is the place where Conservatives are usually more underestimated than elsewhere. So I said, okay, this is Ontario with the published results. You see that there is much discrepancy. For example, if you look at the NDP, it goes from 14% to 24% in about the same period. And you see the same for the Liberals and the Conservative. If you revisit, and now I give 3.5 points more to the Conservative, and I withdraw 1.5 to the Liberals and NDP, and look what I've got. The Liberals are still ahead, but not that much. So, if it is the same as 2011 and 2008, what's going to happen on Monday is not sure. No. two polls differ according to modes. And I love these box and whiskers plot. In French, it's what a moustache. Really pretty. Now, on the left-hand side, you have the box and whiskers plot. So the box is between 25 percentile and 75 percentile, and the line is the median. And on the right-hand side, we have the mean, estimated means, taking into account the evolution, the change during the period. And what you see is that those IVR polls are more variable than the web polls or the telephone polls. And in particular for the NDP, it's normal that the box is larger because there was more move for the NDP. But the three boxes according to mode, on the left-hand side you have IVR, middle you have web, and on the right-hand side telephone, which is nanos. The boxes should be the same. And what you have is IVR poll. I've estimated varying from 20 to 40% for the NDP, while web has from 24 to 37, and nanos from 2 to 34. So, but there are no outliers. If I go to Ontario, now you really see that in Ontario, the IVR polls are much more variable than the web or telephone polls. In addition, the web polls have the Conservative 2.5 points less than the telephone, and the NDP almost 4 points more than the telephone. And for IVR, they have the Liberals 2.2 points less, and the NDP 2.6 points more. So IVR are more variable, and you have many outliers. Those are the points that are completely outside of the range. Okay, so you have some Ipsos, Abacus data, Ipsos, and Forum. Many of them for NDP, in particular the web polls. Now let's look at Quebec. I didn't give you the evolution, the change over time for Quebec because I wanted to focus and be within time, but now you have Quebec for the difference according to modes, and you see that this Forum research poll where the NDP at 54 was way outside the range, and there is one Ipsos that is outlier also, but you have the web polls, the Conservative Party 1.7 point more, the Liberals 2.9 points less, and the Bloc 2.7 points more. And the IVR at 5 points more for the Conservative, 2.9 points less for the Liberals, and 2.8 points less for the NDP. So there is much difference between the modes in Quebec, and we may think that it's counterbalanced, but you have the web, both web and IVR have the Liberal Party lower than. So with this, the conclusion: the Conservative Party will likely be underestimated. There is much variability according to mode, particularly in subsamples, provinces, and regions. For example, the Bloc Québécois in Quebec has been estimated between 14 and 27% last week. So it's not 14, and it's likely not 27. It is somewhere in the middle. In my analysis, I have it at 20%, with the Conservative at 20% also, and Liberals and NDP almost at the same level, between 25 and 29. So those who project the number of seats rely on global information by province and region. And this information is much variable. And even though they take the same polls, their estimates vary. And I see also that if you look at one particular district, you will see that the different estimators vary, and you have many places in where you will have two parties at the same level. So when we want to have a strategic vote, polls are absolutely often not very helpful in a way. So if you want to cast a strategic vote, beware of the polls. Okay, they are not that helpful, and you should not take a definitive decision on the polls, because if you look at the seats, the people who do that, there are 13 people out there doing trying to do this. They try to figure out the complete province, and the only information they have is for the province or region, and they try to project this on constituencies. It's very variable by province, it's very variable by region, variable by mode. So
Our next presenter is it's a co-presentation with one presenter. Thank you very much. Ben Forrest, the Department of Geography, and his colleague is Mike Medeiros, who's here at McGill as a postdoctoral fellow. And leave it to Ben. I won't say more of your 9.5 minutes now.
No, I'm on full tenure. Yes, I did want to acknowledge my collaborator in this, Mike Medeiros, my postdoctoral fellow, who's wisely decided to sit back and let me do this. In contrast to, I think, the other presenters, I am at this moment prepared to make a very firm prediction that I will tell you who won the election on Tuesday. That joke was actually funnier in the focus group. Anyway, the project we're doing focuses on the diversity of candidates. That is, looking at the identity of candidates in the federal elections. As many or all of the presenters have said to this point, let me emphasize this is very preliminary and partial. I think when Deaton was asking me about this panel maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, I said, oh, of course, we'll have all sorts of data, but apparently our research assistants have other classes and work, and they need to, quote, sleep. So we are presenting only partial results here, but I think I promise you some interesting things. First of all, I think it's just to give you a kind of a sense of what we're looking at. We're looking at the four candidates for the parties for Scarborough North. Now, Scarborough North is a new riding. It's the first time this is being used. This election's the first time it's being used. If you just look at visible minorities, that is the proportion of the constituency that is identified by the census as visible minority, this is the most diverse riding in Canada. Almost 90% visible minority. And so we can take a look at our candidates. We've got 3 visible minority candidates, 3 women. 2 of them, and then one of the things we're doing is also looking at the biographies of candidates as they're presented on the websites. In those biographies, 2 of these candidates talk explicitly about their origins, South Asian origins, India and Tamil. Our candidate who's not a visible minority, McDonald, actually talks a lot about her Greek roots, the Greek ancestry, and then Chen actually in his biography doesn't talk about his ancestry at all. So what we're seeing is some different ways that candidates are presenting themselves in terms of their ethnicity. If we then look at Vancouver South is 75% visible minority, and it's either the second or the third highest, I forget which. We see actually a slightly different pattern. Here, all 4 candidates are visible minorities. But again, we have 3 women and 1 man. But if you read the biographies, none of the candidates actually talk at all about ancestry. The incumbent Young, there's a very oblique reference to her Chinese ethnicity, but it's not made much of. And in fact, all of these candidates emphasize their ties to either the military or the police. So you can see even, even with 4 visible minority candidates, you're seeing some very different presentations of self. And then if we go to the other end of the spectrum, technically this is a new riding in SPZ, but it's very similar to one that was used in the prior elections. There are no visible minorities in this particular riding, so it's the first percentile, and it's the least diverse on a number of other measures as well. And here, sort of not unexpectedly, we see no visible minority candidates, 3 men, 1 woman. And if you read the biographies, they all emphasize, none of them talk about ethnicity or ancestry. They all really emphasize their ties to the region. So again, so we're seeing different kind of campaign strategies. But then things really start to get interesting when you look kind of in the middle. So Ottawa West, NIPI, it's in the 25th percentile in terms of proportion visible minority. And coincidentally, about 1/4 of its population is visible. So we have 1 visible minority candidate, 2 women. The visible minority candidate is actually conservative. There is no incumbent because the conservative MP stepped down. So the conservatives as a party are the incumbency. So I think it's clear that AP is not a token candidate. He's a very serious candidate that the conservatives have put up. What's interesting here is that Abi makes again kind of an oblique reference to his Muslim identity, but otherwise none of these candidates talk about ethnicity at all. Okay. So these are kind of anecdotal examples. But what can we say something more systematic? Well, if we look at past elections and the past 15 years, what we see in Canada is from 2001 to 2011. The visible minority population in Canada has increased dramatically. It's increased 40%, going from about 13.5% to just over 19%. But if we then look at the proportion of visible minority candidates, we do not see a corresponding increase. The numbers have remained around 9 or 10%. So we're seeing a pretty dramatic increase in the number of visible minorities, the proportion of visible minorities in Canada. But this is not reflected in candidates who are running for public office. And if we break this down by party, again, there's not a particularly distinct pattern here. There's not a lot of difference among the parties. They all have about the same proportion. And in the last 4 elections, actually 3 different parties have had the highest proportion of visible minority candidates. So it's not easy to say that one party is particularly favorable to visible minorities, or that one party is particularly exclusionary. It's a very mixed picture. No real distinct pattern by party or by time. Women. The story with women is a little bit different. In fact, there are 3 things going on. 3 different things. There's the story of the NDP and the Green Party. And this is, if you're looking for good news, these 2 parties are the good news for women. That there's been a pretty consistent increase from 2004 to 2015 in terms of the proportion of women candidates. That the NDP now has over 40% women candidates. In fact, they make a big deal. This is front and center on their website, so they want people to know this. And the Green Party is actually quite close. It's just under 40%, almost 40%. So here we have a clear and consistent increase, not at parity, but getting close to parity. You then have the Conservative and Liberal Party, slightly different pattern. I would say modest increase, modest trend of increasing number of women candidates, not as distinct as the other 2 parties. But there is an increase with both of them, although notably the Conservative Party has a lower proportion than any of the other parties. And then the Bloc, very hard to say anything consistent going on in the Bloc. They seem to oscillate between about 25 and 30%. So it's not clear what's going on. So if you had to summarize, if you wanted to tweet this, I would say good, not great news for women, and at least so far, not so great news for visible minorities. Okay. But the real question then is not just the proportions, but how do parties make these decisions? Why do parties nominate women, visible minority candidates, Aboriginal candidates, Francophone or French ancestry candidates? Well, this is a very simplified conceptual model, and we can think about at least three factors that figure into candidate selection. Clearly, the policy of the national party matters, particularly with a party like the NDP, which has an explicit policy about the number of explicit targets for the number of women candidates and other marginalized groups. The composition of the electoral district associations themselves. Constituency associations are actually the organizations that pick the candidate in each riding. And clearly, the composition in terms of the demographic composition, the membership of those organizations, oh my God, I will hurry up, make a big difference. And of course, the riding demographics, what the population of a riding looks like, makes a difference. There's other things going on. There are course interactions. I'm not going to talk about those. What we're looking at in my next slide is really focusing on the relationship between riding demographics and candidate selection. So where do diversity candidates come from, and do diverse constituencies have diverse candidates? And the very preliminary answer, please don't vote, is yes. If we look at visible minorities, and these are partial results for Green and Conservatives, we've managed to code about 200 ridings for each party. And what we've done here, what we're showing here, are ridings that have a visible minority candidate. And what we see are rather high visible minorities. So for the Conservatives, in ridings with a visible minority candidate, Conservative candidate, those are averaging about 45% visible minority. Greens, 39%. And if we compare that to ridings without a visible minority candidate, we see the proportions are much lower. So the very quick answer is yes, visible minority candidates are coming from constituencies with more visible minorities. Yes, this is correct. This is
data.
This is hot off the press, preliminary data that we have not cross-checked, so don't quote me on this. But with a difference this large, I'm pretty confident that's going to hold up. And then finally, before Rick really puts the hammer down on me, I did want to thank my research team, our team of RAs that are physically studying for their midterms. So thank you.
This is a very polite herd of cats, I can tell you. Anyway, our next presenter is Yannick Dufresne. He's at the University of Laval. He's a postdoctoral fellow in political science at Laval. He is the lead analyst of VoxPop Labs, which is the creators of Vote Compass, and he's going to be speaking about Vote Compass now.
I'm very glad to be sitting at the same table as all these brothers. Thank you very much for inviting me. I kept it in 10 minutes. That was for me to stay on message. When the worst question that can be asked about Vote Compass is what is Vote Compass? Because I don't know where it's like 10 persons are running to the same door. I don't know how to start. So I tried to put in 10 minutes for me to stay on message. What can I take on this today? So at the same time, I needed to say also that we're collecting data right now. We don't have answers. We don't have time to think about it. And also there's an exclusivity contract for the data at CSDC, so I had to stay in between this deadline. So yeah, if I would have had like more than 10 minutes, I was starting to talk about the education and engagement purposes of Vote Compass, which is the main thing, the reason, the raison d'être of why this tool existed in the first place. So I'm I've thought about the fact that it's now more accessible than it used to be, especially for the visually impaired. There's also a whole new algorithm for the 2 dimension, but the third dimension too, that deals with the problem that we had that we faced in 2011 with the dimensionality, the heterogeneity of the dimensionality in Canada. There's a whole new mobile version that is fully work on every mobile. Before we had the same site that was on the mobile and on the computer. Now we rebuilt entirely the software. There's now a Facebook plugin that permitted people to go back to their results and see their friends where they are. It's not very relevant for people like us who don't want to show up in there. But still. And I was actually surprised. I thought that there would have been a problem during the campaign. Some people didn't want to show a journalist would have showed to all where they are, but it didn't happen. And the more detailed results were more on the front page that we could see directly on issues per issues where parties are standing next to you and with textual information. So I knew that what would interest people here, the data collection. We're now that I put that this morning, so we're now 1.5 million respondents or users, depending on which side we are of the fence. So I decided to say, like, maybe with this data, how can we, this data with data in general, so different angles, and I read different questions yesterday, 2 days ago, and it made me change all my presentation about new ways of collecting data and new angles. And she wanted to ask because it's not only me, right? It's the whole team of us got a lot behind me. I thought about the new product. It was the signal collector. So I thought about thinking about 3 different angles. We can look at the results we have right now. So the first angle is the vote contest data itself. Yeah, as I said, we collect daily data. Like we have an average of 2,000 users. Now we're talking about usable users. Because the people that don't give their sociodemographics, we don't consider them usable users. An average of 2,000 for writing, and sociodemographics, values, and behavioral information that we collect too. Why are we collecting these information? It's because we can use them with census to try to correct for selection bias, which is big enough, if not huge, in both of that data. So we weight based on geography, sex, age, education, profession, religion, civic engagement. For those that are less informed, like in a nutshell, like the weight, the assumption, is the idea that we have in our bias data, there are cells. If we think about the entire combinations of these variables, which are talking about many thousands of combinations in the whole population, where every cell is one combination of every demographic combination. If we have too many of these people, we'll weight them down to approximate what they look like in the census. Does it mean it's no more biased? It's more complicated than that, obviously, right? We're using MRP methodology, which has been used by on Xbox Live data, which is way more biased than the vote contest, and they've been able to approximate the results, the electoral results of 2012 in the United States. So we're using the same type of method here. So does it make sense with Canada 2015? That I'm not sure if I'm violating the explicitly on track, but still, that's what we're when we wait, that's what we get here. And I was reassured when I see that it fits pretty much the pattern that's seen like I was terrorized. So it fits pretty much, and in Canada and in Quebec, it's also the NDP going down, and the only I'll come back to this because we'll go back to the second angle, the full aggregators, which is a huge fashion this year, it seems. Yeah, the idea of this signal from noise, right? The whole idea of why we would put polls together, and it's that we would get macro vote share. We would aggregate this to get something that is better. There are different assumptions based on this. There's no herd effects that these polls actually would give something that is more of a signal among little noise. So we did that for the signal, which is one among others, and it's reassuring to see that we see the same patterns again. Same pattern we saw in both of that data, we see it there via aggregation. The only difference is in Quebec that I saw, it's closer to the one of Pierre Martin's, Greg Martin's calcul électoral that shows it was very similar to Pierre Martin's calcul électoral, but the only difference with the vote contest data is that we put the block a bit higher than the conservative. When we looked, I don't know if you remember, it was the block was a bit higher, but it's for the rest it's pretty similar. Then it's based on different assumptions. However, when we try to get to the votes to the critics, there's different assumptions again. Like how do we get once we have these numbers? How how do they translate into seats? But it depends on who will go vote and how the numbers move at the riding level, proportional, or is it like this type of movement inside the riding? So it's different assumptions again. But when we look at the different, and this signal is one of them here. That's our product, but it's pretty similar when we look at the trio under the global mail, the electoral, also called and Durand. Like we're pretty low than the averages there, and yeah. So one day maybe somebody will have to build an aggregator of aggregators. That's maybe the next project here. So to finish, like on the angle bridge, this is way more experimental. That's where I've been more focusing during the campaign. Is to go, and it's really similar to one thing you showed earlier. Just look at people's prediction itself. And I gave myself a challenge to not use census weight, not use polls, and just use the vote contest itself, without even caring about selection bias. It was my own personal challenge. So how we did that is we asked the question. In your opinion, how likely is that people in your writing will like the Liberal Party, people with a 10, let's say, and after that we translate it. And for all the parties, 5 for the New Democrat Party. And I did it, maybe it could be more, maybe might be more nuances with this kind of questions. And we can then, because what means a 10 if you put the other one at 9 compared to a 10 when everybody puts all the parties at 0. So I played with the scale and I tried different ways of, and I validated my trials with the result of the past elections. And that way of building the scale worked well. And I will go faster when I don't have much time. But when we did that, right, and that we come on past elections, we did that in 9 other elections at the writing level. With the we have different writings, and we have we saw that there was a correlation between the certainty measured in that scale and the real closeness of the race based on the election. That's for all the elections I did. And we could see that we could find some places that were more volatile, were more close, and the people were pretty good at predicting how close the races were. I tried to do it for the Canadian election, and finally, it seems pretty much in the average. It seems more in the close race, but it seems the people think that it's less close than in the Alberta elections were. So what does it say for us? But we can look at this and look at the certainty measures and see the most secure ridings or the most battlefields, like Bécancour is still at the NDP, is very, very close to the block. And the fail rate is an outlier. It would be, not very honest, nobody knew that, so I would just remove it. It would be very similar to what we saw when we were testing this thing. And sometimes, weirdly enough, sometimes people prediction model like this work way better than the polls. And people said, oh, maybe it's just the people absorb the polls and just say it. No, in here, like in Alberta, I think the polls were right. And people still didn't believe it. So people reason. And they knew that in 2012 they were saying that the wild rose was supposed to win and the polls were right or were wrong. So people didn't believe it. So there's something to think about it. And if you're interested, that's already on the Ready Canada site. But based on the certainty and where, you can search on maps like this. Makes sense. It's just a different angle, right? When I'm talking about 3 different angles, 3 different types of information, what I would be interested in would be to print out the 3 types of prediction at the writing level and see, are they the same? Do we have our failed prediction? Are they the same or not? And then maybe an hybrid model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Final presenter is Dominic of the University of Montreal. He's a professor of the School of Library and Information Sciences, and he's going to be talking about a project titled Words from the Campaign Trail. Someone wants a prediction.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to start by thanking my colleague Frédéric for inviting me here less than 2 weeks ago. So we had to really work hard without knowing what exactly we were going to talk about today. So I'm probably one of the few ones here that is not a scientific, political science specialist here. I'm actually a data mining specialist who was actually interested in analyzing some of the information that was distributed by the various political parties in the context of the current election. This work was made possible by research assistants that I have to name. You're probably watching it online right now. So Hélène, Olivier, and Ariane did most of the work that I'll be presenting today. This work was made possible by a shared insight grant that had nothing to do with political science. So if some of my colleagues mentioned that they had no answers to some questions that could be asked concerning the votes, that is even more the case for me. I'm just going to give some cues that we've taken from the information that we've analyzed. And within the context of that shared grant, the actual work had to develop an infrastructure for evaluating text analytics tools, and develop software, just to show you how far we are from the kind of study that has been shown so far. So we decided in the context of evaluating some text mining tools to take some data that was published by the 5 main political parties in this election. We crawled the websites daily from the political parties and gathered all the official documents that were published in French. Why in French? Because Bloc Québécois does not publish English documents. So if we wanted to compare things similarly, we had to pick things that could be compared. As of today, we gathered 786 documents. For the statistic people here, that means a little bit more than 350,000 tokens, or a ratio of 14,000 types. That means, in other words, that just means it's a really small corpus. And the distribution of those documents within the various parties is as follows. Bloc Québécois, 60 documents. Conservative, 122. Green Party, 108. A lot more from the Liberal Party, 264. And the NDP, 232. We also gathered the same information for 2006, 2008, and 2011, but I will not talk about the analysis that we did on those documents. Okay, the methodology that we used. We gathered the corpus, first thing, on a daily basis. We then filtered it, meaning that we had to compare documents that we could compare. Some documents were really long, some really short, so we had to normalize them. We had to remove most of the noise, and we had to identify the features that we could use to compare the documents. In other words, we extracted the lexicon from the corpus and we filtered it, removing the stop words, just keeping the thematically relevant words that were in the corpus. So mostly here, natural language processing and lexical statistics. We then transformed our initial corpus, so the documents officially published by the political parties, and we transformed those documents after being filtered in a format that we could submit to the various algorithms that we use to analyze the document, and then process with evaluation, interpretation, I leave that to you, and integration in a more complex application. And everything that I'll be talking about for the next 6 minutes is available on the website lesmotsdelacampagne.com, where we publish blog entries, and each blog entry is one analysis of the data that we have, and I'll be presenting some of them. And we explained the methodology also that I'm not going to talk about today. Okay, I'll show you a little bit more than three output that we got from our analysis. One concerning the Syrian refugee crisis and the distribution of that topic within time. We can see that a topic within a political campaign does not last much longer than 5 days. So if something goes wrong, what you can think of is that it's going to go wrong for 5 days, and then the other parties will not talk about it anymore. So if you do a mistake, it's a 5-day mistake, more or less. The distribution of this topic, so the Syrian refugee crisis, within the 5 parties, you can see here. So the Nouveau Parti démocratique mostly talked about it. Bloc Québécois did not really talk about it, and not very surprisingly, means that for every 10,000 words, how many words concern the Syrian refugee crisis. That's probably not too clear, so I made it a little bigger. And then we tried to analyze how this topic was correlated to various words. We have to be extremely careful here when analyzing that kind of data. It's not the distance between each word that's really important, it's the angle between them. So we can see here at the top that the Bloc Québécois mostly talks about the Syrian crisis with security, Canadians wanting to help them, whereas the Conservative Party talks about it as a menace terroriste et ainsi de suite. Nouveau Parti démocratique, humanitaire, canadien, plan, famille, and the Liberals, devoir, réfugié, agir, débat. And most of the words that come here are the ones that are equally distributed. We're also concerned with the topics that were discussed within the documents found in each parties. So you will find on the website a heat map like this one, where we evaluate the distribution of every topic within the parties. The closer it is to red, the more the parties talk about it, and the more it's blue, the less they do talk about it. So not surprisingly, the Conservative almost do not talk about the environment. The Green Party really does talk about it. So that's the kind of it. And obviously, the Bloc really talks about Quebec, where the other ones do not. Not surprising.
Where's the
The hijab is not there. The niqab is not there because we did that analysis before we started talking about it. So we're going to revise our results at the end of the campaign. And then we tried to cluster the political parties according to the topics and the distribution of the topics. So we can see that the NPD and the Liberals are the closest parties. The Green is closest to those two, then the Conservative, and finally the Bloc is the most different party in this campaign. We did the same thing for the environment. We can see that the distribution is equal during the whole campaign, so it was a topic that was coming back regularly. It was also evenly distributed within the various parties. And we did the same kind of mapping between the lexicons of the words within the documents that were relevant to the environment topic. And we can see that Bloc Québécois is quite different from the other ones. The Green talk about scientific, sciences durables, énergie climatique, and that's the complete opposite of the Liberal. Last thing, I still have less than a minute, as I can see. We tried to do some too. Okay. That might be the most interesting experiment that we did. So good, I'm happy we have 2 minutes. We did a text classification experiment in which we tried to predict the political parties of each document. So in a perfect world, every document from the Bloc would be predicted as one from the Bloc. We wanted to see errors because the errors are the most interesting documents. So in this situation, we can see that 3 documents that were actually written by the Bloc were predicted as belonging to the NDP. For the NDP, 1 was predicted as being written by the Bloc, 6 by the Liberals, 2 by the Green parties. You can see that the Conservative had 2 documents that were predicted as Liberals and NDP. And I don't have much time for the explanation, but you'll find some obvious explanations as why some documents were distributed by, were predicted as belonging to other political parties. And I'll stop here. Thank you.